Well, now, as we are almost 48 hours removed from a second straight weekend of shocking news, some polling is coming out in a post-Joe Biden dropout world. What does it look like early on for Kamala Harris, who had an incredible fundraising haul, $81 million raised in her first 24 hours as the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. But what does the polling look like? There's a lot of polling that has dropped here in the last, not even 24 hours, really the last day, 12 hours or so. These have been coming out and dropping across social media and on, just different media platforms. And the big takeaway is this. Donald Trump is still in a very good position to end up back in the White House. But it's definitely going to be more difficult than it would have been with Joe Biden. That's the grand takeaway. And this thing is still Donald Trump's to lose. It's still Donald Trump's to, frankly, screw up. That's the only way that Donald Trump does not end up back in the White House. He is going up against a candidate who did not make it to the first primary in her own party back in 2020, Iowa. Kamala Harris didn't get there. Her own party didn't really like her as a candidate 4 years ago. Now she gets handed the reins. She's got to deal with all the baggage from the last 4 years, being Joe Biden's VP, and she's got to start from scratch. You just heard Fox News mention she's going to Milwaukee today. Now, that's a good play. It's a good first step for her. If I was her team, that's where I'd be going. The Republican National Convention was just there. Go where they were. It's a state that you need, even though it's a state that you're not likely to win when you actually look at the numbers. I mean, Wisconsin, of all those Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin appears to be the one that is most out of reach. But doesn't really matter. It's a smart first political move for Kamala Harris. But the polling would suggest she's got a lot of room to make up ground on against Donald Trump. So here's some of the polling. Here's what it's shown here over the last 12 hours or so. Morning Consult has a poll that has Donald Trump up 47-45 over Kamala Harris. Now, it's still, more or less within the margin of error, but for a national poll, for a Republican to be leading at this point in the race is pretty rare nationwide because you're including California, you're including New York, you're including some of these big blue states. At this point in the game, the last time a Republican was winning a national poll in July of an election year was 2000, when George W. Bush was running against Al Gore. It's been 24 years. So it tells you a lot about where things are at right now. And polling isn't God. We know that, polling has certainly been flawed in recent election cycles, but it's all we've got right now. So Democratic voters, by the way, are more likely than Republican voters to say they're much more motivated to participate in the political process this election season following Joe Biden's decision, mirroring the gap between Biden and Trump's respective 2020 supporters. So that, to me, is a very interesting twist over the last day or so. If you're a diehard Republican voter, according to this Morning Consult poll, you are less likely to be motivated to get out to the polls this election season than Democrats. And that's why this move, as much as anything else, made a lot of sense. I mean, I talk to people, obviously, here in Kansas City and around the country, but just anecdotally speaking, people who see the world and see the political arena different than I do, have almost acquiesced in the last week and a half to accepting Donald Trump's return to the White House. But since Sunday, there's been a little bit of a pep in their step. They've suddenly felt like, well, maybe we got a shot. It's like Chiefs losing a big game for like 3.5 quarters, and then suddenly with the, let's say 8.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, you pull it to within one score. That kind of feels like where we've been over the last day and a half or so. There's a renewed energy and enthusiasm. And that was the purpose of getting Joe out. It didn't matter who was going to fill in the gap, and it's most likely going to be Kamala. But anyone at this point would have been better than Joe. I mean, a vegetable at this point, a literal vegetable, would have been better when it comes to the enthusiasm. Because for the last month, you've had disastrous debate, awful public appearance, misusing names and words on the world stage. And then, of course, the near assassination of Donald Trump. And Democrats in my life have just been like, oh, my goodness, what can happen next? How much worse can it get for our party right now? Donald Trump's going to get back in there. But at least for a day, they've got this kind of a sugar high where they feel like things are, getting back to a sense of normalcy. They've got a shot again. And they do. Let's be very clear. They do. Anyone suggesting this thing is over is wishful thinking. This morning console poll also goes on to say here, most voters, 63%, say Joe Biden should serve out the remainder of his term, compared with 30% who say he should resign now. When it comes to Trump, Biden's exit appears to have prompted soul-searching amongst some GOP voters. So that may be something to monitor as well. But here's the thing. As much as I mentioned the good news for Kamala, there is bad news as well. A lot of bad news. When you look at the aggregate of all the polling that's been done the last 24 hours in the wake of Joe Biden dropping out of his re-election bid, Donald Trump is still doing better amongst almost every demographic against Kamala Harris than Joe Biden did against Donald Trump in 2020. Once again, just to reiterate this point, Donald Trump is doing better in every demographic than he did against Joe Biden 4 years ago. With white voters, Donald Trump is doing 7 points better than he did 4 years ago. All right, just so we're putting this all into perspective here. Donald Trump won white voters by 12 points 4 years ago. He's now up, per the polling, by 19. You go to black voters. Joe Biden won them by 84 points. Right now, Kamala Harris leads by 57. That's a 26-point swing in favor of Donald Trump. Hispanic voters, Trump has swung them 12 points in his favor. Joe Biden won Hispanic voters by 21. Kamala Harris, per the polling, is up about 8 points with Hispanic voters. White college-educated voters, the OWWs, as I call them, overeducated woke whites, they went for Joe Biden by 15 points 4 years ago. The polling suggests Kamala Harris is up by about 2 points with that group. White, non-college educated, of course, the base of Donald Trump's support is about even from where it was. 32 points 4 years ago. Now the polling suggests Trump's up 33. Young voters, this is fascinating. And we've talked about this on the show on and off in recent weeks. This is where Kamala's going to try to make her move, and I'm seeing her trending. I'm not on TikTok, but I'm seeing stories of her trending on TikTok. They're going to make a huge move for young voters. Joe Biden won him by 24 points. Right now, polling suggests Kamala Harris is up by 8. That is a 16-point swing with 18 to 29-year-old voters towards Donald Trump. So those things continue to stack up. And this is not, once again, the gospel by any stretch, but it's all we've got right now to look at and analyze. And Kamala's got to make up the ground with minority voters and young voters. And if she can't do that, if she can't get those numbers back to Joe Biden levels of 4 years ago, then the path is going to be very difficult, John. There's no doubt about it.
Surprise, surprise. Doing well on TikTok. All right. TikTok brings
Yes.
much joy. It's not like we don't know who's behind that.
Yeah, President Xi is very much willing to make sure
Yeah,
Kamala Harris is
please.
trending on TikTok.
You bet.
Yes. The Chi-Coms are loving Kamala trending on TikTok. They desperately want that on a Tuesday morning across America here on KCMO 95.7 FM. We'll talk to Dave Traubert, bottom of the hour. We got a busy, frankly, hour ahead. Ro Khanna, California Democrat congressman who's on the House Oversight Committee, will be here on this show at about 7:50. And many of you ask about this Project 2025 thing that the Heritage Foundation has put out that's getting a lot of attention. We've got a guy with the Heritage Foundation next hour. Hans von Spakovsky is going to explain what exactly that is and how it's being used as a fear-mongering tool. And don't forget, it's Tirade Tuesday. All coming up on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio.